government's been doing. At the beginning of January of this year, the government in Germany has enacted a new law which it's actually not entirely clear what it can do, but everyone already knows what it can do from social media, Facebook and so on. It's parts of the German government, including the intelligence services, working in conjunction with unnamed media companies to restrict the debate of the general public on these matters. Now, I just put it out there. Lots of Germans fuming about something they think of as being very unfair. What is the best way to make that blow up? Almost certainly to try to put a lid on it, dampen it down. A German publisher said to me recently, the public now here read our papers in the same way that people used to in Eastern Europe. They read between the lines. They read that yesterday a person did something to another person in a place. And they know they're not being given the information, so they fill it in themselves. Because they didn't name the person who did the act, it must have been a migrant, etc., etc., which actually means that the public mind thinks even worse than the facts that are happening. And I mean, and people think there's no potential downside to this. Just one other point on this. Eric hits, this is a subject of fascination for me because it's such a terrible moral question to try to answer. I like Eric. I don't have much tolerance for people telling me about the greatness of German culture and the importance of reinvigorating it and so on and so forth, because our ears start to jangle with rhymes and echoes. But at the same time, it's not possible, as Eric points out, it's not possible for a culture to live in permanent guilt with no form of redemption, ever. Ever.
And it's not fair.
It's not fair.
So,
right?
if you notice, having a conversation on immigration now, I've, in a civilized way, waited to let you finish, which is part of the importance of this conversation. Yeah, I was going to say that actually everything you said there, and that's what's if people in the audience do identify as centre-left, the last thing you want to see is the breakup of the European Union and its surrendering to far-right populism. And I can guarantee you, until unless we reconsider this conversation around immigration, it will destroy Europe, not just in a cultural sense, but in a legal sense. So I'll give you an example of what's just happened in Denmark. A liberal, in the European sense of the word, in the British sense of the word, a liberal head of state and prime minister in Denmark has just overseen the approval in the Danish parliament of a law that is an attempt too late to deal with this question of a lack of integration in their country, of what they call immigrants and children of immigrants, and it's a euphemism for Danish Muslims. And what they've decided to do is approve a law in the Danish parliament that they will designate certain areas as, and they're using this word, ghetto areas. And the children born in these areas, who are born to immigrant parents but are born in Denmark, are named ghetto children. That's actually the phrase they're using. And they've decided, because they can't do this by religion or race or gender, they can do it by geographic area, and it's constitutional. And what they've said is that every ghetto child in these designated areas that the law stipulates will be obliged to go to citizenship class to learn how to be a Dane, and if they don't, the family will have their welfare withdrawn. But that doesn't apply to children who are outside of these areas that are the ghetto areas. The other thing they've said is that anyone who commits a crime in these ghetto areas will face double the punishment in criminal law than anyone who commits the same crime outside of these ghetto areas. They can see how a parallel legal system is in danger of developing here. And of course, what they've done is that in Sydney, I think you have Lakemba and a few other areas where there's Australian Lebanese Muslims. Is it called Lakemba? What is it called?
Lakemba.
Lakemba, yeah. Right, so you can't say, okay, I'm going to do this where there's Muslims. What you could say is, okay, Lakemba is a troubled area. I'm going to do this in Lakemba. And everyone knows what you're really talking about is Muslims, right? Now, there is an example in liberal Denmark where this has happened. It's already, that's the case now. It's approved in Parliament. And of course, the dangers of a parallel legal system are self-evident. The dangers of grievances developing and people feeling like they are being judged for the same crime in double the punishment and therefore being discriminated against, all of that doesn't really need me spelling out. Why did that happen is the question. Why has liberal Denmark suddenly in their parliament approved this? And that's because of years of neglect of this one question, and that is integration. And it's why I'm saying that it's inseparable. We have to have a policy that ties immigration with integration and a sense of what the culture is of the countries that we're in. And that means slowing the whole thing down, because you can't have integration if your immigration is too fast. And so when I say to everyone who identifies here as centre,
You know, Maajid Nawaz brought up a very interesting point. I was not aware of that thing happening in the country of Finland. But this is what's happening in these Western European countries, folks, is that it's completely different in terms of assimilation and integration that's in the United States of America. Other than probably Dearborn, Michigan, which has about 25 to 30,000 Arab, people from Arab countries, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, Saudi Arabia, and others. There's probably about a 65, 70% Muslim population, 35%, Christian population. And then you've got your Coptic Christians, from Egypt and others inside there. But, if you're talking about heritage, or if you're talking about ethnicity, yes, Mideast Arabian. And they've pretty much integrated into society. It just so happens that and a lot of Christians in that area too live there, but predominantly Muslims. But because the expansiveness of the United States of America, like literally 3,500 miles wide in such a huge country, that most of the immigrants that have come from these countries have, they've settled all over the place. Yes, there are huge accumulations of immigrants, obviously, in the big cities, New York, Chicago, Los Angeles, San Francisco, in New Jersey, these other areas and stuff like that. But for the most part, you don't see enclaves of just immigrant populations, and that's it. Now, there is something happening in Minnesota where the Somalis have been basically dumped. So you've got 10 to 15,000 Somalis that are living, in Minnesota. And that's sort of what happens when you have the refugee crisis that occurs. Where do you put people? Well, you dump them in a state. Where do you dump them? You dump them in pretty much one of the whitest states available. I don't even know how that happened, or, began and made that decision. But anyways, that's what they're doing here. So you don't see those ghetto enclaves of just, immigrants, that have come in America. But in Western European countries, that's what's happening. In Sweden, and you can name cities. England, you can name the cities where 60, 70, 80% of the population of a city or a locality is going to be, migrants. And either those that came and are, they're 2-3 generations and have just stayed in those areas, or illegals that are coming. And of course, they're not going to go to any other area where there's nobody, other immigrant populations not like them. So they're also going to migrate in these areas. And so what Finland has done is they basically, like Maajid was saying, is that they just didn't, I guess, evolve with the times, and they allowed this underling class to sort of fester. And obviously, with making this law that you're going to have double the time if you're one of these ghetto children, who knows what's going to, but they said that's constitutional because they can do it geographically. If that's going to sort of help alleviate some of the problems that have been caused by these gangs of, and I guess they're Finnish kids now. I mean, they're born in Finland. But the problem is that if they never get to associate literally with the majority of Finnish population, then how are they ever going to integrate and assimilate? And that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to play catch up, and it is so freaking hard to do that. When these kids, even if they're born first, second generation, if they just stay in that area, they've gone to school, they're homeschooled in that area, and their religion is just going to be of one. That's what culture, religion, but you've got to be able to mix with other people. And if you just stay in those designated areas, in those designated localities, those designated cities, I would imagine you probably got those are lower to middle class income, migrant families that maybe have been there for a couple of generations, and the newer migrants that are coming in as well, filtering in. But I would imagine those that have been able to go on to further studies in schools, go on to get professional jobs, are professionals, engineers, lawyers, doctors, accountants, nursing, teach those ones. They probably have left those ghetto areas and have moved out into other areas of Finland and living whole different lives than migrants from similar countries, similar ethnicities. You know, it's to see. Now, as far as, saying for these children that are born there in those ghetto cities to take the Danish citizenship exam and study for that, I think that is brilliant. And if they want to tie that to their welfare payments, abso-freaking-lutely. If you're going to get freebies, you got to do something, because you certainly don't want these kids to become dependent upon the welfare system again. You want them to be able to see what it's like to be Danish. Finnish. You want them to understand what that's all about. You want them to take these classes. And I think it should be even more than that. I think they should have integration classes in terms of what's also outside of the cities that these children live in, and what type of accessibility they're going to have in terms of going to university and colleges and schools outside of those enclaves. I think that, but like I said, is it too far gone in those countries, and they're trying to play catch up with these new laws and policies? Let's hope it can make a difference, folks. Otherwise, Western Europe is really, really in for a load of crap. I mean, the trouble is right on the walls, folks. You know it. We all know it. Anyways, folks, we appreciate you taking the time to watch. You've been watching the Dr. Nasser Sheikh Show. I've been your host. My name is Dr. Nasser. If you haven't done so already, we'd love for you to subscribe to the channel. If you found our content entertaining and valuable, let your comments down below, share them. Check out our other video links above and below. Leave you with my final thought as always: when you're right, you're right, and when you're left, you're wrong. Until next time, folks, take care and stay safe.